Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another video. It's been a while. This video is quite touching upon quite a broad topic. I'm sorry if I ramble yet again. But I want to talk about JavaScript with Shiny in particular, and essentially why myself as well as a few people in the community keep banging on about it. It's not a direct question I get, but questions often pertain to this, or I see some people looking at myself a bit like a weirdo as to why I keep talking about JavaScript with the Shiny web framework. Because it is true, you can write Shiny applications without writing any JavaScript. That is true. Though under the hood, Shiny is doing that for you. And essentially, why JavaScript with Shiny in particular, rather than because there's a feeling that I think we talk about JavaScript with Shiny a lot more than we do with many other web frameworks, regardless of the programming language. I see very rarely a lot of talk about using JavaScript with Django, for instance. So, why is it? Well, simply it comes down to how three things probably: how the web works, the web frameworks that we build around it, Shiny being one, and the problems that you have at hand and the solutions that you find for them. So to explain this, let me start sharing my screen. So I wrote the book JavaScript for R, and there's of course a big section of it on Shiny, but I think I forgot to put a good rationale for why you should bother in the first place, and this video is probably it. So you can buy it, you should, amazing, but you can also read it for free if you click this button. And essentially it's just, I'm not going through any of the content here, it's just as an example for what I want to explain. So if you take a Shiny application, which I have here on there, like a very basic Shiny application, there's an input, and you enter the input, you click submit, and it adds one to your input. Amazing. But that's how a Shiny app works. Hopefully you have plots and tables and other stuff in there, but that's a very basic Shiny application, right? If I go to the book, for instance, which is here obviously a static site, it's serving static files. So if I go to this first section of the first chapter, you see that it ends in .html. I'm simply returning a file, but that's what it does essentially. There are different paths, and you navigate to these paths. So if I go here, I'm in the chapter on prerequisites, and it's in its own file here. Same if I go here. Another example would be GitHub, which we're all familiar with, but here I'm at a certain path, which is my what is it, profile, ID, whatever. So I'm at this path, and that's what the server returns. And essentially every time you do this, you execute a GET request to a server somewhere, and the server returns a response. If I go to one of my packages here, one of my repositories, again, the server returns a different response. It navigated to a different path, and the server returns a different response. So every time we click on one of these, we make a GET request, which is similar. Again, if you use the HTTR to play with APIs, you do something like this. And you can actually do a GET request to github.com. to GitHub, and you'll get the HTML, the raw HTML without, because it's not a browser. If I go to the home page here, obviously it's rendered the HTML, it's taking into account the CSS, it runs the JavaScript, etc., etc., which the R console is not going to do. But you look at a Shiny application, going back to this, when I visit the application initially like this, the page loads, right? And after that, you don't see any other loads. Every time here, I can change the content that's here. I could plot review the plot, but the page doesn't reload. We don't execute another get request, sorry. That's the nature of the framework, and essentially, to the best of my knowledge at least, there are two broad categories of web framework. One, some focus on single page applications like this one. Every Shiny application is a single page. There is two L's, well, yeah, here, and we can take an example of Shiny application. We'll see, well, hopefully the app loads here. Doesn't seem to be loading. Let's take another one. Now that's the one by Renjo, isn't it? Yeah. Oh. Goodness, but I can't find one that works. Use it in trade. There. The app is loading here. And once the app is loaded, there's no further get request. You'll never see this app sort of flash before you. These tabs are essentially the content that's shown and hidden. But there's no get request, no requests, no further response. You can't avoid making one, just like we do here. We must make at least one and get a response. The initial, and essentially the response that you get, to the best of my mind, is more or less the initial UI that you have there. You may have observers and stuff that you run on start, but for the most part, it's essentially the initial UI as HTML that's returned, right? And that's for single page applications. Then you have multi-page applications, often referred to as traditional. They certainly predate the single page application, where, like GitHub, you have different paths, right? So I can go to Optifacts page. That's a different path. Works very differently from Shiny. Of course, this is just a broad categorization of it. One single page uses WebSocket, the other one multi-page request response kind of. But of course, you're not limited to that, depending on the framework you use, if you use one. But you can mix and match. So for example, here, you could think that this is a form and that's gonna resubmit the page, re-render something, but it doesn't. Of course, if I unfollow, it didn't re-render anything that happened with by the WebSocket and JavaScript. And so that's the first thing. And that's essentially why JavaScript is so important with Shiny applications, that whether we like it or not, when I do this here and this 4 appears here, and that it's now being changed to 5, that is all done via the WebSocket. Via the WebSocket and JavaScript. There's no avoiding using JavaScript to change the content of an already loaded page. So that's the basic application that I built here like this. For example, MBORX, with which you could build single page applications, but I'm not sure why you would, since Shiny is another web framework that does it certainly better. There is something similar, and I press submit. Yeah, press submit, and it re-renders the two. But here you saw that it took, yeah, I did it on purpose. I did a sleep of 2 seconds to show that it's actually loading. So you can see that it's taking 2 seconds to load and return the response. But here, the difference is, for instance, at least with MBORX, and I think most of the web framework that will work like this, is you re-render the HTML in the response, and I can render the value that was entered here just as X. But I'm not using any JavaScript, and that's why in Shiny, JavaScript is so useful. And then, like I said, the third point that I had said is simply based on the problem at hand and what you're trying to solve. So another good example of single page applications is Google Maps. So when you're on Google Maps, essentially you'll see this, but this changing, but this is not really a path, it's a query. And here we have Hotel Lake Geneva. If I click on it, something appears, but you don't see a GET request being done. That would be very obnoxious. So using essentially a single page application that works with WebSockets and JavaScript is much better suited to solve the issue. And that's essentially what it comes down to. And why I think if you want to do a lot of Shiny, looking into JavaScript is a very good idea. Well, thank you. I'll leave you on this.